This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the podcast about Red Dwarf on the We Made This Podcast network. We are into our specials between Series 8 and the dreaded Back to Earth. And my name is Mark and I am your host for this one. We're looking at something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at Craig Charles's first, and indeed only, collection of poetry. It's called No Other Blue. And being blunt, none of the regular hosts wanted to join me to talk about poetry. So I've roped in someone else who really does like books and poetry. Welcome to the podcast for the first time. Hello, Baz Greenland.
Hello, good to be here. I know Red Dwarf and poetry, so I guess I'm the right guest for this.
When you write as well, is it just prose you write, or do you write poetry as well?
Well, it is prose. I've written 3 books now, 2 which are published, and a few short stories. But this year I decided I would join a writers group every month. I join there's like an in-person or an online person, and we look at poetry. So because it's a big group of writers, the idea everyone gets together as a group of writers, and we look at a piece of poetry because it's the easier thing to look at with a big group of people. And then we have 20 minutes to write whatever we want based on something, a theme prompt from that poem. Then you can write prose, you can write a script, you can write poetry, whatever you want. And I found actually that bizarrely, I've been writing poetry for the first time since I left school back in, since I finished A-level English Lit back in 1999, and I haven't looked at a poem since then, but I've actually been writing poetry for the first time ever, and it's been really interesting. Particularly, I've been able to channel all my childhood trauma into poetry, and I've written some pieces that people have really responded well to. So yeah, I'm kind of rediscovering poetry for the first time.
Fascinating. And I think that's the whole point is you wanted to talk about this. And so I'm delighted to have you on, a fellow co-host from some of the other podcasts on our network. My background is actually a little bit more, well, I have an English degree. It's not something it's a long time ago, and I do use it for when I'm writing my ceremonies. You know, you learn how to write well as part of a degree studying literature. And I've played at writing poetry, but I've never been brave enough to release anything, even like self-publishing. And I've got quite a few poems that I really, really like that, I don't know, reading this kind of made me think, well, should I do something about them? No, I've decided is the answer to that. No, they're going to stay on my laptop so that no one can read them other than me forever and ever and ever. So, before we start talking about No Other Blue, we always have what we call our officer's exam. And what that is it is 5 increasingly difficult questions about your engagement with Red Dwarf. So are you ready for your exam?
Let's go for it.
Okay. When did you discover Red Dwarf, and what is your first memory of the show?
So I did watch it back when it aired, not from the beginning. I do remember things like series 5 and 6. Certainly at the time, I wasn't a massive fan, but I did watch it. I think, ironically, I kind of came to it a little bit later on when it wasn't as good. So I remember very vividly series 7 and 8, because I was at sixth form college at the time. And we were all a collective group of geeks. We found each other, and we liked Star Trek and Buffy and Babylon 5. And I remember particularly series 7, watching that around friends' houses. We'd just kind of crash and watch whatever geeky TV at the time. And I do remember series 7 quite vividly. So in some ways, series 7 for me is probably I have more vivid memories of that, and then moving on to the rest of Red Dwarf. But I do remember some of the earlier stuff. I've gone back and I've watched some of the earlier stuff as well. And one of my best friends, who was a housemate with for all of university, he was a huge Red Dwarf fan. He goes to all the conventions. He's met everyone. So, yeah, I've kind of got a love of Red Dwarf through him as well. So I am a fan. I'm not an uber fan of Red Dwarf. There's so much geekiness stuff I have in my head, so it shows. But I do like it. Yeah, for me, it's bizarrely, I think, series 7 and 8, but I do remember some of the earlier stuff.
It's fascinating. We've just looked at series 8, and series 7 and 8 are kind of generally quite maligned as it was on the down. And I personally think that's wrong about Series 7. I thought Series 7 was great. The only thing that was missing was the audience, the live audience, whereas Series 8 is incredibly problematic.
Yeah, I can see what he's trying to do, but it doesn't quite work, does it? And then they kind of just go, I mean, as Red Dwarf does, let's just ignore it and move on, which was what they do.
Yeah. All right, so what is your favourite episode of Red Dwarf, do you think?
This is the hard one. I'm probably going to go with a classic like Back to Reality because that's so good. Dwayne Dibley and it's brilliant. But so I think that's probably my favourite. I'm really thinking about what my favourite episode is. I'm a huge fan of Backwards as well because I like how Series 3 just kind of went with a bang. You saw it step up in the third series. And really kind of go for it, become the Red Dwarf that everyone loved. And I think Backwards is a fantastic series opener as well. So for me, that's a really, really good episode, really fun episode. But I think it's probably Back to Reality, like probably a lot of people.
Yeah. Regardless of whether or not you think Dwayne Dibley was subsequently overused, the introduction of Dwayne was just perfect television.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So what is your favourite season of Red Dwarf? You've kind of touched on this, I think, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because I would say probably like series 5 and 6 are probably better, certainly. So probably series 5, I think, you've got episodes like Quarantine and obviously Back to Reality, The Inquisitor. There's a lot of good stuff. I mean, I like all of series 5. So I would say it's probably series 5, but I've got that soft spot for series 7 as well.
This one has caused a lot of controversy because there's a certain answer that I expect and not everyone gives it. Who is your favourite character in the show?
It's a difficult one, really. I like all the four main characters. It's probably Ace Rimmer, actually. I love Ace Rimmer is amazing. And I just think he's so good. And Chris Barry is so good. I love the difference between Ace Rimmer and Chris Barry did so well. I actually went to London Comic Con last November, actually, and Chris Barry was actually doing a talk there as well. I know there's been some controversy with some of the stuff he said lately, but I certainly enjoyed the talk. And he did a brilliant segment where he had Rimmer meets Gordon Brittus, which was fantastic.
Amazing.
I love the British Empire. But then he went into Ace Rimmer impression. It was just so good. It was so good. I think Ace Rimmer is so over the top. And I think they probably, again, used it. He appeared a few times, but they didn't overuse it. I love Rimmer. Rimmer's probably my second favourite, and then Crichton. But I think Ace Rimmer for me is just ridiculously fun.
That is an interesting and acceptable answer, but the correct answer is the cat. Just so you know,
the cat is also great. I like the fact. I mean, it's interesting. It took him. Was it like series 10 or something before they finally gave Cat a storyline or something? But I love Cat. He's great as well. I mean, which makes Dwayne Dibley so great because it's the complete polar opposite.
Yeah,
even more so, I'd say than Rimmer and Ace Rimmer. I think Cat and Dwayne Dibley are just so extremes from each other. It's great.
Okay, so these do get progressively more and more difficult. So the 5th out of 6 question is, what is your favourite moment in the entire show's run?
Right. It's series 7, actually. And I know there were better moments, definitely. But I remember the first time watching the Rimmer song in Blue after he's gone. And Arnold Rimmer. And I was thinking about this. And this is the reason it's my favourite moment, because I knew I'd probably get questions about this. So I was thinking about it. I was looking for IMDb, reminding myself of some of the Red Dwarf stuff. And as soon as I saw that episode, yes, that's the moment. And that song has been in my head for the last 2 hours. So that's how good I love that song so much. There are probably better stuff. But for me, I remember the joy of seeing that for the first time when it was broadcast. I love that moment.
Well, you'll be very popular with regular host Matt Latham for that particular choice, I think. He basically started the podcast wanting to talk about that particular scene. That was one of his focuses for the entire run. And because we take our time and do like lots of specials in between the coverage of the main show, Matt was like, can we do Blue? Remember you got me booked for Blue. I'm doing Blue. And
5 years later, yeah.
It was 3. It wasn't
3,
quite
okay.
5.
Well, but still a long time to wait, yeah.
Oh, yeah, we made him earn it. We definitely did. Okay, are you ready for the very, very difficult 6th question?
Go for it.
Would you like some toast?
I'm going to say yes.
You want some toast? Oh, fantastic. But well, no, you can have some toast. You're always welcome to some toast. I toast, therefore I am. Right, are you ready to talk poetry?
Let's go for it.
Now of the Blue is Craig Charles's only. It said that it was going to be his first, but it is his only anthology of poetry. It was released in 1998 and was published by Penguin. It was illustrated by Philippa Drakeford. And did you have a look up of Philippa Drakeford?
I didn't know.
Well, I did. And from 2009 to 2011, she wrote a series of kids' books, which unfortunately mostly are out of print now. And she has a few images on Illustration Source that you can buy. But it looks like she didn't really do very much after she did the illustrations for this book. And I think that's a little bit of a shame, really. I really liked how she was able to do like really different eclectic styles for the different subject matters of the poetry.
Absolutely, yeah. There's some really interesting imagery there, and then that's what surprised me. You open a book of poems and you think it's going to be just here's one poem on a page, here's another poem, here's another poem,
yeah.
And actually there's some really interesting like kind of comic book style work there as well. And you know when you get things like Flesm or it's like really macabre stuff as well, which is great. So it makes more of an interesting read if it was visual, having that to accompany Craig Charles's words as well. So I was really surprised by the imagery in this.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it to be fully illustrated. You know, you get like some poetry books where, there's a poem about autumn, so there might be a picture of a leaf, that kind of thing. That maybe was what I'd have expected when I saw that it was illustrated. Yeah. But this is a very, very different kettle of fish. And did you like that in general as an idea?
In some ways, yes. I mean, maybe because I've been sort of looking at some poetry in my writers group, I kind of honed in more on the classic poems, but I liked in some ways that with some of these, you're basically reading a comic, but with his words, and that was quite different. So it was a comic, but with poetry rather than dialogue, if that makes sense. So, there was some really good stuff. I mean, again, there were some other ones like Flesm, which was really macabre, and there's some really, and I think actually the artwork gets more interesting as the book goes on as well. It starts off very comic booky and changes, but it's also very kind of real as well. It's like you can see Craig Charles in those images as well.
Yeah, her likeness of Craig Charles was really lovely, actually. She got it right. It wasn't like kind of like photo reality level, but I really thought she got a lovely little cartoony capture of what Craig Charles looks like as well.
Definitely, yeah.
But I think just in general, it's a real shame because she was clearly talented. She really engaged with every piece of poetry that she was given and came up with something that I felt never really missed the mark, regardless of the quality of the poem.
Yeah, definitely.
The book was dedicated to Jackie, Jack, and Anna. Jackie is Craig Charles's second wife. And interestingly, though, Jackie is spelt differently in the book than she is on Wikipedia. So I wonder whether that's... Surely you can't get a typo about your wife's name. So I wonder what's happened
You would
there.
think so.
You'd think you'd proofread that quite... I don't know. I just wonder what happened there. I guess we'll never know.
No.
And Jack is his first son and Anna is his daughter. He does have a third daughter, but I don't think she was born when this book was published. So
right.
I don't think he was dissing Nelly. But I don't like the latest one. She don't count. No, I don't think that's what happened. I think that he just hadn't had his third daughter. It also references a book that was never published in the introduction. And I'm going to call it No Irish, No N-Words. That's not what it was referred to in the book. And I've seen that around that title, but it never happened. He was going to do an autobiography with that title, and it never happened. Do you think you'd find a Craig Charles autobiography interesting? Because a lot of the other characters, the actors who play the other characters, have got them, and Craig Charles doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some really interesting stuff material you're looking at, but I didn't realise he was in prison, for example.
Yeah.
So that was new to me. I think he is an alcoholic. I think
yes.
there's definitely shades of that in there.
About that recently, yeah.
Yeah, so I remembered that, and there's obviously shades of that in here as well. But there's also the stuff about race and growing up. I mean, I grew up in a pretty fairly rough council estate in Manchester for a part of my youth as well. A pretty poor background. You know, we were homeless, living in a refuge, so we got pretty grim at times. It's my poetry that I'm writing about it, and I got a sense from him, the stuff that he was writing about, you know, in like Liverpool and the kind of where it was poor and the city and stuff. So again, some stuff I can relate to there as well. So yeah, it does feel like, looking at those poems, there's definitely some interesting material there to look at.
Yeah, I would have liked to have read that. I think perhaps he needs to change the name now. Or maybe he doesn't if he wants to be controversial.
Well,
I will never say that word. Because
no.
I would have to, in inverted, I suppose, change the title every time I spoke about it. Yeah, I think at the time it was much more of a reclamation kind of a thing rather than the current attitude we have towards that word.
Yeah, I think more in the 90s it was kind of, you know, it wasn't a good word. It was a word that was derogatory, but it was used as, it's kind of almost maybe in the same way that kind of people going, well, like the woke now these days, you know, if you're woke, well, I'm happy to be woke because actually that's good, being good and stuff, and kind of taking it away from the people that use it in the fashion they do. So yeah, I can kind of see what he was trying to maybe go with there.
So the introduction, I've picked out some interesting tidbits that the book is basically 20 years in the making. And for me, it's quite a small book. Considering how much he was on Wogan and considering how much he was up till this time, really, and then a lot less subsequently, kind of pushed as a poet as well as an actor. It felt quite a small book, considering that, in my head at least, he had a lot more work than this readily available.
I mean, he talks about his selected poems, so there's obviously more there. I mean, maybe this is the best. I don't mean to put Craig Charles down at all. I think it's some really interesting stuff. There were only 2 or 3 poems that really hit me. Wow, this is great writing. It was good poetry, but nothing that kind of astounded me.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It's solid poetry writing, I think, if I can sort of say that. There were 2 or 3 that kind of really stood out for me. So maybe he's recognising that he loves poetry, but maybe he's never getting one of these standout award-winning poets. So maybe he goes, this is the best I have, and this is what I'm going to present. So maybe that's what it was. I don't know. Yeah. Well,
the one thing he does reference, which is incredibly poetic, actually, he describes poetry as having to tear open your rib cage and rummage into your heart.
Yeah.
And that was lovely. Well, not lovely because it's quite macabre, but what a fantastic way of describing it. And I think even if you are writing the worst 12-year-old I've been dumped poetry, it really is that. Because it does feel different when you're writing poetry to prose. And I have a fucking degree, but I can't put my finger on why. But it really does feel slightly different.
I think it's because it's personal, and maybe because I've been, say, right in my writing school, I've written a poem about being in the refuge. I've written a poem about my basic neglect for my father, and there are things I've written which I've kind of found a way of channeling that, which is I've had years of therapy as well on this, but I thought this was a really interesting way of tackling that. And I think the more deeply kind of harrowing and personal it became, the more people reacted to it. So maybe there's something in there as well. The fact that I get the idea of reaching inside your ribcage and putting it out and expressing it as well. So I think that's it. I think that's what's relatable about this is it is deeply personal.
I think I agree with you, because some of the poetry I've written, I was flippant about never releasing it again. But part of that is because it is about my experiences of domestic violence and other very, very deeply personal things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that maybe even more than quite a lot of the poetry, that line in the introduction about opening your ribcage and rummaging into your heart, that line just really kind of resonated with me, with me. And I mean, one thing he does also acknowledge is that, like you said, that some of the poems are from his childhood. And let's be honest, you can tell.
Yes.
Because the quality does, I think it's mostly chronological, and the quality does get significantly better as the anthology progresses on. Would you agree with that?
100%, yeah. I mean, I like that he went, this is what I wrote when I was a teenager, and I'm not going to update it and enhance it, and this is what I wrote then. And he absolutely is right. And I think when I was reading it the first time, I read the first 2 or 3 poems, I thought, okay, this is all right. I can see what he's doing here. And then it kind of got better and better as it went on, and the later ones kind of hit harder. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. The weakest stuff is at the beginning of the book.
Okay, so I'm actually going to treat this like I do with this magazine episodes, and I'm just going to very briefly talk about each poem, and we'll say what we think.
Yeah.
First up is I like writing poems, and this for sure gives you an introduction to what the illustrations are about and how they do add to the poems, because it is essentially juvenilia.
Yeah.
Which then surprised me, because it then had an alcohol reference in it. It really felt like a children's poem, and then boom, the last line is about booze.
Yeah, it's like I'm always writing. I can never put the pencil down. I'm always like write poetry. It's very basic but explanatory. And then that last line, I wish that my pencil knew all that I think and would write it down for me while I have a drink. And it's like that kind of hits harder because you get the crux of the alcoholism and stuff. And he's writing this as a teenager, as I think he probably writes as a teenager. So possibly happened even then as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, Craig Charles is knocking 60, so it was. I mean, for you and I in our 40s, it was easier to access alcohol as a teenager when we were that age. So I would guess it was less of a taboo, and maybe he had started drinking. The illustrations show him as an adult man in it, but very much the vibe of the poem right until the last line is quite teeny.
Yeah, very much phrase. So. Yeah,
but. Yeah, I think I liked it because I didn't expect the kind of smackdown of the last line. And I think that really went from quite clearly something that could have been a children's poem to something a little bit more meaningful.
Yeah, definitely.
Next up is George McGee, which, this one is about a kid that was a nasty kid at school that ended up becoming a policeman. And this completely resonated with me because the exact same thing happens with this kid in my school. I'm not going to say his name either, obviously, but this young man was a racist, actively a racist. He applied to join the police straight after school and he failed the Are You Racist test.
Right.
3 times. They let him have another go until he passed it. And that is the 90s for you.
Yes.
You don't get a second chance at the Are You Racist in the police anymore, which is progress. But this whole story really resonated with me because it just hit me so personally. But did you have something similar, or what did you think about it if you didn't have such a kind of like deep cut for you?
So I certainly was bullied horribly at school. Even got as far as, again, I'm not going to mention names, stabbed in the stomach with a fountain pen.
Good grief.
Yeah, when I was living in the refuge, I went to a grammar school. So even though I got there on academic merit, shortly into my first year, we were in a refuge and in a rough council estate. So the entire class shouting "scum at you" is going to resonate with you. So yeah, I was horribly bullied. Again, I'll probably write a poem about it one day. but yeah, I get that. I mean, I guess I don't for this poem itself, I didn't quite resonate with, I was bullied myself, and I can reflect on that. I didn't necessarily relate too much to it. The thing about that, which kind of hits harder, is that then he became a policeman, and that particularly we got the later poem. I think what's the later poem? It is, I think it's Halt later on. I almost wonder if it's the same person. It kind of feels like it could be in a way. It probably isn't, but thematically it feels like the same person in that one when he's stopped by the police. And obviously, again, as a white man, I recognise that there is this institutionalized racism. What you said about the guy who did 4 times and then got into the police speaks to that as well. And so you obviously seen a lot. You saw it again back in 2020, a lot in the US, but also in the UK as well. And it's still there. It's still an issue that needs to be to be stamped out of the police, really. It's still very much ingrained in there as well. So, but I get KJ as a man of colour would have experienced it in a way that we probably would have never have experienced it. So I think the fact that this bully becomes a policeman and then you get that poem later on, they kind of connect together for me. Yeah,
it absolutely does. And I think, I'm going to try not to be too passionate about my views about the police, but the reality is, as a gay man of a certain age that lives in Manchester, you're going to have strong opinions of the police. Mm-hmm. And this young man as a kid did not help with that attitude towards the police. You do get some excellent police officers. Let's not tar everyone with that brush, but it's, I even have friends who are police officers, but yeah, the politics of Craig Charles in this book are very much my politics when it comes to attitudes towards the police. And I want to touch on the artwork, the recognition of the nasty little smug smile of the bully that becomes the nasty little smug smile of the police officer that pulls over the black guy for speeding.
Yeah.
It's really, really well done. And even though the poem is really quite powerful for juvenilia, that really does add to it. And I think it really shows that Craig Charles was right to look at illustrations, particularly for the poems he'd written as a younger man, I think.
Definitely, yeah. That smile becomes wider and wider and wider until it goes to that police at the end. Absolutely, you see the growth of that. I mean, there's a thing about they did test on him as well. It's like the growth of a psychopath, isn't it? Really, and kind of you see that kind of grow.
Yeah. Next up is a poem called "I Want to Feel Your Bum," and well, whilst I'm glad it was written as a child, I question its inclusion because it is kind of creepy.
This feels like it was written as a teenager, and the kind of all the hormones flying about and trying to struggle with those kind of first hints of relationships and all that stuff. So I get where it's coming from. I do agree. I think, this is published in the 90s. There's been, particularly the Me Too movement and stuff moving on. I think if this was published now, I think that would have been excluded for that reason. But I get the kind of the teenage hormones trying to find yourself, all trying to find, people you're attracted to and kind of trying to connect and kind of where do you go and what are the rules in place? You're trying to fill that out for the first time. Emotionally feel that, but not physically fill it out. Well, but obviously in this case, both, I guess both in a way with this. But, so I understand why it was written. I do agree though that it should have been excluded. It would have been excluded if it had been published now.
It's a kind of punchline that was considered funny in the 90s. Lol, he was a kid.
Yeah, I'm only 12, yeah.
It was tasteless but more acceptable in the 90s. We always kind of discuss how people probably should have known better. And even in the 90s, I think, whilst it was a kind of gag that would have got regularly cracked, including it in a poetry book does feel like a poor choice to me. But this poem was something that he was actually using quite regularly. I've watched stuff where he's been interviewed in the past, and he was using this publicly at the time. We watched some CBS specials where he was flown over to the States, and they asked him to say a poem, and he said this. So I think he really liked this poem at the time. I suspect, we've all learned, or those of us that wish to learn have learnt, and this probably isn't one of his favourite poems at the moment, whereas it clearly was in the 90s because it was something that he would, if he was asked to quote a poem, he would use this one.
Yeah. And actually, it's probably one of the weakest poems in terms of the style of writing as well, I think, in this way. It's very simple. Yeah. But I think maybe that's the point because he's only 12. But yeah, it's not one that I particularly was fond of as a poem in this book. No,
and I think there is some merit in how it directly contrasts with the next poem, which is called Shipwreck My Soul. And there is a huge jump in quality. And the choice of the seashell as an illustration was clearly to highlight... Now, that was what I was talking about when we first started talking about the illustrations, is the little seashell was kind of what I was expecting each poem to have. Not the comic book style of the first three. And Shipwreck My Soul in Your Eyes. That's just beautiful.
This is the first one that actually resonated with me. I really love this poem. I think the language that is used. I want a cold pebble beach. I want sea in your hair. I want salt and sand on your skin. There's some really kind of powerful evocative imagery in this one as well. And it's much more mature in its approach to essentially attraction to the woman in question. So the guy in question was a computer programmer, hence the software, my softness. I love that description from him as well. Yeah. And and I will shipwreck my soul in your eyes is a beautiful, beautiful line. I think it's one of my favourite lines in the whole book.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it reads like, without wishing to be rude, a more serious modern poem than a lot of what we see in this book.
It contrasts the juvenilia of the earlier poems.
Yeah, and I like the placement next to "I Want to Feel Your Bum." I think that was clearly deliberate.
Yeah,
and that was really nicely done. I did look up computer rash. That is a real thing. It is a medical condition that's caused by chronic exposure to a screen. You can actually look at a screen for too long to get it's called screen dermatitis. So maybe I need to get out more because I do look at my screens quite a lot.
Between work and writing, I spend a lot of time on the screen.
Maybe it's something for both of us to figure.
Yeah,
because obviously it was just a pun in the poem, but I wanted to see whether it was a real thing as well. And it is. It's rare though. You have to spend a lot of time. I think maybe my World of Warcraft addiction in the mid-thousands could have got me a computer rash, but I'm not too bad now. The next poem is called Brewer's Droop, and it's about his ex-wife and how he struggled to get an erection. And, I mean, as something written by a bloke, it's a really brave move to include that.
Yeah, I think that's it. There's a bravery about it as well. And the idea is, there's lines like, as you know, I know, we all know, a man is not a man without a spanner in his hand. And the way you use the imagery as well is quite clever as well. It's a very kind of open, brave poem there as well. So yeah, he's like, your ego can't kickstart and go if you can't make those juices flow. The way he uses that, the language, uses motorbikes and spanners and kind of engineering stuff. And then there's some very clever use of imagery to talk about the subject without basically saying, I couldn't get an erection for 10 lines sort of thing. So that kind of works quite well.
I think dealing with a sensitive topic with some humour, but not in a crass way is really well done, actually.
Yeah.
And I think to gently mock that, it's not just me. A lot of men will have struggled with this kind of thing. I think it's an interesting choice and maybe a really good choice to try and knock down these barriers about, it is okay to talk about erectile dysfunction. It is okay to talk about how you might have struggled to, as he put it, consummate a relationship.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not uncomfortable talking about it only ever happened with women, but I've had this problem before. Yeah. And but there was quite a context to me that I was trying very hard to want what was in front of me, and I fucking didn't. So I don't really know if I don't know. It just doesn't quite resonate with me because it's about a woman, I guess.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I mean, myself, in a heterosexual relationship, I kind of get this. Sometimes, I mean, I've been with my wife for over 20 years now, so we're in a very loving relationship, and but so maybe I don't necessarily feel some of the kind of the pressure of that, but I get the sense of pressure as well at the same time, pressure to perform as well, and the idea of being a man, I kind of in that kind of classic heteronorm sense, I guess, as well, where he's coming from, certainly. So I can kind of understand that, yeah.
Next up is a poem called Halt, and this one was performed on Black on Black and SNL, and it's pretty dark, forgive the pun. It's yeah, and I think the term walking whilst black, I don't know how much that was used at the time, but it's certainly a term I've heard used quite frequently by my friends that are black and brown, and they regularly just describe it as like walking whilst black. You haven't done anything. You literally just stopped just in case the black person has done a crime. And that's just grim.
I mean, it's terrifying. Reading this one, it's terrifying. Again, the imagery as well. And if you look at like the hand and the face of the policeman, and that smile again, it's not the same. I almost related the same person as the bully from the earlier poem, but I guess isn't necessarily that character. No. But what's really interesting is that Craig Charles is in this. She's drawn him in, and he's like almost like a third of the size of the policeman. Yeah, it's he's so diminished by the kind of the not only the kind of the size, but actually because there's lots of those hands and face, the whiteness of the policeman as well, and how it overpowers him as well. So it's really, I mean, and obviously again, the language in here, he uses the N-word a lot as well, or variations of that theme as well in the way he treats Charles as well. So yeah, it's really terrifying stuff. But again, not something I personally can relate to, but I've seen it on the media. I've seen it, I've seen it portrayed on TV and film. I've seen it in real life news items as well. So I kind of get where he's coming from, even though I can't necessarily relate to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I arrived in Manchester not long after some really, really horrible police cruelty towards gay people. And the people I met were kind of still reeling from that. And so the people I was meeting had had a really, really rough time. And I remember them using the term, walking whilst gay, which obviously they picked up from the black community because again, it's about oppression and it's about power. And what I like about, like what you said, that the size of the police officer, it's not necessarily that he was a big guy. It's just the metaphor that of the power dynamic. And it was written in 1981, but I do feel to some extent it could have just been written in 2023.
It does. It's still absolutely relevant. There's a couple of poems here that will be written at the time and are hugely relevant now. And if anything, more relevant now than the 90s. And that's what's really terrifying. I'm not saying there wasn't racism, but I think everything feels like it's got worse over the last few years, the last 10 years certainly. And this when it feels. And the other thing about this is that a sense of relief when the radio comes through and the policeman has to go and deal with something else. But it's the last line of walk along the pavement all in one piece after another confrontation with community police. The fact that this is not a one-off incident. This is just one incident he's catalogued in this poem as well is heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up is I Hate the Way, which is a poem that's set in a prison, but it's basically a metaphor about a loveless relationship. And having been in one of those relatively recently, this one got me. And I think poetry does tend to be, like we've talked about, how we can't truly empathise with the things about race. Whereas this one, because this happened to me, and, you're living with someone that you don't love anymore and they don't love you. And this one just, I kind of, how like when you're reading poetry, sometimes you have to take a pause. You put your finger in your book and you just have a few seconds to just go, oof. Yeah. This was my first oof. Even though the earlier stuff about racism in the police got me, this was my first pause for me.
Yeah. I'd say I've been very fortunate to be in a loving relationship for over 2 decades. I consider myself fortunate, but I mean, so I get kind of what he's writing. Yeah, I don't connect it in the same way as you, but I think it's just the repetitive. It goes on and on and on and on. I'm driven to despair. It's very well written the way it's done there as well. I can imagine as well in almost a literal version of this was so many relationships broke down after lockdown because I think when couples were just literally they had to spend all their time together and they couldn't go out and do anything. That's what broke a lot of people because they needed that space and stuff and they came to that realization that it was too much. So I can that's how I kind of almost read that in a more modern sense. But obviously I'm not fortunate enough to have experienced that. I'm fortunate enough to experience that. Sorry, not experience that. Is what I say. Yes, good right terminology. But yeah, it's well written, and I get. And actually, it's interesting because I didn't connect with this one as much, and particularly from that point of view. But I guess I haven't experienced that myself. So when you're saying it now, I see this poem in a new light, which is interesting.
I think you're bang on the money about lockdown, though. This will have happened a lot more to a lot more people in a shorter space of time than when the poem was written. And I think what it also did was the opposite effect as well. Couples also became closer and realised what they had. Yeah. And it's almost like there were two binaries of lockdown. I know a lot of couples that are getting married, and I know a lot of couples that broke up because of lockdown. obviously he had no idea, but this particular poem really kind of resonates in a modern way, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And I also want to talk about the illustrations, and they really also emphasize how you bottle stuff up and how you're trapped, and when you bottle things up when you're not communicating, and it just really kind of really hit me, that one. And I think with the earlier stuff like writing poems and George McGee, as it started to hit its stride with the next few ones, it was a bit of a relief for me, because I thought, is it all going to be a bit naff? And
yeah, I agree.
This one in particular, I was like, okay, you've got me. Next up is Bully for You, which is another really fucking grim one. And if we didn't know Craig Charles's politics, we do now.
Yeah, absolutely. The very overt Nazi imagery in the prison guard.
Oh, the Hitler tash. The fucking Hitler tash in the illustrations.
Again, it's the, I think it's supposed to be the prison kind of band, but it's very much that white band on the arm as well, and the black uniform again, which kind of conjures that Nazi imagery as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, he looms over Craig Charles and the imagery as well. I think you're right. The more you look at this, the imagery is really effective.
Yeah.
On bringing these poems to life.
Yeah, and I think Craig Charles's politics of writing on behalf of left-wingers who've been oppressed, it is exceptional. And it's a lived-in experience, not just walking whilst black like we've discussed. This is clearly that he was bullied whilst he was in prison by a white prison guard. I don't think you could write something like this that works the way it does without lived experience. And it's just fucking grim and hard to read.
Definitely.
Next up is He Lit a Cigarette. And this one was written for Susan Rattigan, who Red Dwarf fans will know was actually his girlfriend, who he got a part in Red Dwarf. She was the human Camille in Camille.
Right, okay.
So I looked her up a little bit. She did have a relationship with Craig Charles. It was all very amicable when they broke up. And she was a session singer for Stock Aitken and Waterman. So a lot of our 80s favourites will have her as a backup singer.
Oh, brilliant.
But she never really made it big. She had a couple of small-scale albums that did okay and got reasonably good reviews. But she's never really made it past being, moderately within an industry that she clearly liked, unfortunately. Yeah, I've been in this situation. Another one where the subject matter of the poem, I was like, oh, hello. And, maybe not in a room that, okay, I have done it in a room that you rent by the hour. Not many times, but I have. I don't know if you can still get rooms by the hour, but,
I wouldn't know. I don't know.
I wasn't suggesting you did.
Yeah, I kind of, this poem was, maybe again, I've sort of one night thing. It became a bit of a relationship when I was like 19, but that was really, I didn't really experience anything like this really. So
I didn't experience anything like this week.
Okay.
But no, I think again, it goes right back to the poetry hitting what you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
I like how he captures the desperation of both lust and desire for something more than what this is. And it's really, really good.
Yeah, very well written. I mean, interesting again, the imagery is not Craig Charles.
No.
He's not the male figure in this one, which is interesting. Maybe that's why I didn't connect with it. I don't necessarily feel like I got this probably was based on experience, but at the same time, a bit more removed. Maybe that comes out in the imagery as well. But yes, I mean, the way they kind of build up the tension of the scene is very good.
Next up is Yuppie. I think this is a sentiment that resonates even though the word yuppie isn't used anymore. So it is very indicative of the time because of the specific vocabulary, but also it's another one of these poems that it hasn't fucking changed.
No, it's still the same. I've worked in offices for I've worked for the same company for 17 years now, and I've known exactly people like this. They tend to be psychopaths. But it's an interesting one because at the same time, as the older I've gotten, I've started to earn more money. I like nice foods and nice clothes, and and you kind of you aspire to get more. I'm now at the point where I can afford a holiday once a year.
Yeah,
things that I've come from where I came from in a very poor childhood to now. I've strived to get one, and I enjoy the nice things in life. But I guess there's a point where that kind of consumes you, and it becomes all about material wealth over kind of just emotional wealth.
I think what has dated is what is considered to be posh and luxury. Karate isn't luxury, and neither is sushi. Everyone, I might go for sushi this afternoon. I'm going to the cinema. I might go for sushi afterwards. There's a Yo Sushi in every shopping centre. So I think, whilst it probably needs an update of language and references, the vibe, the message hasn't changed at all.
No, and it's to the point when the imagery gets bigger as well, and particularly the one with the she lives in a world of lotions, waging war against the wrinkles with beauty cream, and you see that kind of haggard face and the cream. It's brilliantly well done, and But I guess the metaphor is that far when they are home and that incredibly long bench, and they're polar opposites from each other as well. And actually, the material wealth means there's no actual kind of emotional wealth in that relationship at all. They are completely separate from each other, and that's what makes it so sad. And I think it's interesting. I think what I quite like is when media or any kind of form will look at wealth and explore. It's not that nice. I mean, I've just finished watching Succession. I adore Succession. It makes wanting to be wealthy the most miserable thing you could ever do. And I like it when actually, wealth isn't everything. And I like it when, things like Charles's poem expose that, and you see actually, they may have everything, but they ultimately have nothing. And I think that's what's really cleverly done here. With that final line and the final image.
Yes. Fully agree. And I think, again, it's another one that is strengthened by the artwork, and it's the first usage of a full page in the anthology, and the two contrasting full pages where they've got nothing in common. We've got the man and everything that surrounds him in his life, and the woman that everything that surrounds her in her life, and there's nothing in common.
No.
And that's like an alarm, isn't it? You obviously need your own things, but in a relationship, you also need to have things in common. And those two big spreads, the words were strong, but they were strengthened by the images around them.
Yeah.
And the final image of the gigantic sofa where there's a huge gap between them and nothing. I mean, perfect. Just perfect.
Again, the imagery really brings it to life. It's a good poem made better by the imagery, I think.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah, very much so. Next one is called Hypothermia. And holy shit, this one resonates. Just the cost of living crisis.
Oh, God, I hated it because of how much it resonated.
Oh,
and
wow, just wow.
Yeah.
Gritty left-wing reality is what I've written in my notes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the sadness of the newspaper, the coal snap victims, the press reports we've had. It's all anovaks and duffel coats and woolen scarves and mitts. It's been here far too long, and now it's getting on my nerves. And it's that kind of sense of constantly wrapping up against the cold. You see, it seems people die when the weather turns dull. It's like an annual seal cull. It's just, it's horrific, but so powerfully done. This is the first poem, I think. Shipwrecked My Soul was the first one that resonated with me, but this is the first one that got me. I went, bloody hell, this one is so relevant to what's happening now.
Yeah.
And again, if anything, you talk about the concept 98 that we did like 1 year of Labour. We've just come out the Thatcher years, knowing that.
Well, this was clearly written during Thatcher, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But it almost feels worse now. I don't know. Yeah, these days with the cost of living crisis, and you hear about people just dying in their flats of hypothermia because they can't afford to put the heating on.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking, and I think he captures it really, really well there. The older wrapped in blankets as they watch the thermostat. The idea is, can I put it on for half an hour just to stay warm? And there's again, the imagery is the woolen hat and the kind of cloudy air in front of her mouth as well.
Just fuck.
Yeah.
I think I just kind of like sat there agreeing with every vicious, bitter word.
Yeah.
And I was like, my heart breaks for the past, but nothing has changed. It breaks for the present and the future.
Definitely.
And this was another one, finger in the book. Deep kind of exhalation, needed a pause. It's so powerful.
Yeah, the line that and heating allowances applied for long before would start to arrive in 3 days after they were dead. And it's like, God, it hits like a gut punch.
Yeah, it does. And
it does.
I think I'll always respond in a similar way to things that explicitly and completely reflect my politics. I think a right-winger would just sit through this and kind of shrug. Whereas this book isn't for people who vote Tory. It is not for you.
No, it's not. Absolutely not.
I genuinely don't understand how you could vote for a party that is able to do this to old people, read something like this and not feel shame. So
yes.
I don't understand it, but this book is clearly not written for that kind of person.
No, not at all.
Little bit of politics, ladies and gentlemen. It must be Shipwrecked and Comatose, hosted by Mark. Next up is more politics, and this is called Family Way, and I've just definitely written by a Liverpudlian. Because I live in Manchester, but I work in Liverpool a lot, and I fucking love Liverpool. I love Liverpool's people and their attitudes and their don't give a fuck outlook on life. And there's something about this poem that definitely couldn't be written by anyone other than someone who's from Liverpool. And I love it for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a desperation and grimness, but a reality to it as well, isn't there, about this one. And I grew up in a pretty rough council estates around Lancashire and Manchester back in the 90s as well. So, I've seen people like this in my past as well. Yeah. And it's really, really sad that the idea of the dad who broke his back and now he's become the kind of the villain of the piece as well, and the idea that Jimmy's coming home in spring and you think, well, what did Jimmy do? He stole a wedding ring so they can get married. It's so sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad the way it comes together.
Yeah, I think what it does really, really well is capture the deep-rooted loyalty, but also the desperation of people living as working-class people in the 80s. And my background is, my dad's dad was incredibly working class, but my dad was the first from our family to do any college work. And similarly, I was the first in our family to go to university. So, my values and the stories I heard as a young man in a relatively affluent situation are inspired by this kind of thing. So I do consider myself to be working class because of my background, despite the fact I had a relatively comfortable upbringing. And my values and my politics are probably more working class than my dad's are now, because, I do work hard in my real life job as well. And again, my love of Liverpool, my love of Liverpool's people, working class folk that give a shit are my people. And this is a poem written by a working class guy who gives a shit. So this was always going to be something that really kind of worked for me, even though it is, like a lot of the poems in this book, a really tough read.
Yeah.
Next up is the title piece, No Other Blue. And it's another one of the more subtly illustrated ones. You just get some flowers in the top right-hand corner. And it's one that Craig Charles explicitly says that he is proud of. And for me, I think he fucking should be. This is a work of art.
It's a really beautiful poem. I love the image of this one. Again, it's another one which is just strips it back. And it's just all about the imagery and the repetition. I want lazy days, daisy days, chaffinches, church bells, and songs of praise. That finish with kisses and cuddles on you with skies of no other blue. It's a lovely. And I think after the really heaviness of things like Family Way and Hypothermia, there's something quite uplifting about it as well, which is lovely. It's about love and wanting the kind of happiness and funny days, sunny days with colours collide like a birthday bouquet. It's almost like classic poetry in that sense. In that sense, it's more about colour and it's vivid and there's repetition there as well. I think the way it comes together, it flows really, really well.
And I think what it does, the flow definitely helps with this. It captures the kind of almost flow of the emotion of being in love. And I can also really empathise with the idea of being in love and being ready to live together, but not currently doing so. And this feels like that encapsulates that we're ready, but there's something in the way. And it's really, really just lovely. And I think perhaps more so than people who aren't working class may not engage with the stuff about the working class. People who aren't black may not engage with the stuff about being black. Whereas everybody shares an understanding if you've been in love. And also, you know, the situation of wanting to take the next stage of a relationship like this covers.
Yeah.
And it's lovely. And I think there's a real acknowledgement of which poems deserve the subtle illustrations. And that's done really, really well in this little anthology.
Definitely, yeah.
Next up is In the City, and it just feels, whilst it's another great poem that encapsulates the struggle of the working class, it doesn't feel like it needs to be there so soon after Family.
No.
Maybe it could have been put in elsewhere, or maybe this one wasn't really needed, in my opinion, as good as it is, you know?
I'm kind of saying the imagery speaks for it, but I don't know, it's so grim.
Yeah.
And it kind of, you know, after Hypothermia Family Way, you get the lovely No Other Blue, and then you go straight back into In the City. It's gritty and it's grimy, and as I walk down streets with dirty guards and cracked pavements and broken, battered chip shop shutters, Nazi symbols and bedroom windows, rusty garden gates off their hinges. I like the flow of this poem. I like the language that you use in this, but I just don't necessarily know if it's needed. It feels like one poem too much in the context of what it's writing about.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was like, are you being a shitbag by having that opinion?
Yeah. Maybe we are. I don't know, but it just feels like it's so grim. We've got the message of what he's trying to say about his life and about the situation and about the country. This doesn't necessarily add anything to new, it just reinforces it.
And if it was an anthology of poems about that specifically, that would be different to what is clearly a collection that does go in lots and lots of different directions deliberately. So, yeah, it just felt like too much too soon to me.
Yeah.
Next up is Consultants, which I love the term Molotov friendly.
Yeah, in his description, yeah.
I think I'm probably Molotov friendly as well. And did you get a kind of vibe of Nazi experiments here from this?
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Particularly, again, with the imagery of the line of the police as well. I mean, it feels almost surreal, this one. It doesn't feel like this possibly could have... If this happened, bloody hell, it's horrible. But it's the consultant's notebook. He said, it's funny how N don't show bruises. And to demonstrate the point, he kicked me in the head. And then it's an interesting experiment that someone had to prove to determine the difference between black skin and white. It feels very much like that kind of Nazi experimentation imagery as well. I almost get a sense with all the other poems that these happened in his life. I really hope this didn't happen. And I really hope this is like a surrealist version of events as opposed to just reality, because it's, if you kick me enough, I bleed. It's again, the imagery is powerful as well, but it's a evocative poem, and it's horrible, and it's full of racism and violence and against Charles and people of colour. But again, I'm not someone of colour, so I can only relate to it so far. This might be a very different read for someone who is of someone of colour. Yeah,
I agree, and I think, I don't know whether you would agree, but I think the "we bleed" thing, I think it made me think of "If you prick us, do we not bleed?" the Shakespeare quote from Merchant of Venice, which again is a reference to racism, and I think that must have been deliberate. That must have been deliberate. But you're right, it is so strong, and it is so... I also really hope it didn't happen. Do you think it did? Because I think it probably did.
There's probably an element of something that happened. Yeah, I'm hoping it's almost exaggerated a little bit. The language is exaggerated in that kind of, which makes it more surreal. But I suspect there's definitely truth in here as well.
Next up, he's not letting up. It's called Interracial Sex, and it's about when interracial sex was legalised in South Africa, and it still boggles my fucking mind that interracial sex was illegal literally anywhere in my fucking lifetime.
It doesn't feel real, does it? I don't understand. And I think what's really interesting about the poem is that Charles doesn't understand it either. He mocks all celebrations. You can have interracial sex in South Africa, but it's a mockery of it because why is it something to be celebrated? It should just be something that happens, you know.
I was 7 and I knew it was okay to have a black girlfriend. I mean, fuck me. The idea is just...
Yeah.
And I think this poem is deliberately simple to make it effective.
Yeah, it is. And the image, I'd read them as well, because it's really, do authorities think they'd stop the unrest? There'll be black civil rights leaders too out of breath to organise a demo or choose to mourn because they've been too busy having interracial sex. It's like, is this, all the stuff about racial rights is going to end because they've allowed basically people of different colours to have sex? No, is the in the last bit, or is it just another whitewash, just another con? Everyone's happy, but the killing still goes on. I think so, don't you? It's very overt in what he's saying there, but it's a mockery of this celebration because it shouldn't be a celebration in the first place. It shouldn't have needed to have happened. Yeah,
exactly that. Next up is Further Grimness. It's a poem about war, written after the Falklands. It's called Blood on a White Flag, and it's a direct reaction to the using the word victory on its cover, and the full page illustrations. This is the first kind of real divergence from her style. I mean, we did see some nudges towards it.
In Yuppies, particularly.
In Yuppies. But this one, I was like, this is amazing. This is the same artist.
You wouldn't think so. You'd think it's a different artist entirely. It's so dark and macabre. The imagery is fantastic. Yeah,
and I think You'll Never Be Innocent Again is one of the most brutal things I've read in a very, very long time.
Yeah. Again, the language again, and deep inside the gloom of a decomposing room, they pinned onto his bloody chest a medal, and they wrapped his head in paper and put him in the rain. The pain, don't forget the pain, you'll never be innocent again, she said. It's just, those final lines are just so powerful.
Yeah, and the full page images really add, and this was another pause one. This was definitely another pause one.
Yeah, I agree.
Next up is, I'm going to go with Flessim as the pronunciation.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to pronounce this one.
Yeah, Flesym, Flessim. And again, more of the full page illustrations.
Yeah, wow.
I think the progression of the book is worth acknowledging, that it does seem to, with the exception of In the City, which I thought felt like it'd been dropped in and maybe could have been not included. It feels like the progression of this book and really kind of works. And good grief, the illustrations on this are just the most beautifully macabre, unexpected, wonderful and harrowing things. And I'm not sure I even fucking get the poem, but I don't care because of the illustrations.
Yeah, in my infrequent bursts of blind religion, I throw my hands to God and let the dreary rhythm of the dead excite my fingertips. But it's about actually, is there such a thing as religion in the world that we're in, which I could get why he's questioning it. But yeah, it's moments like that. That page, it's the, in my special moments of ever loving tenderness, I pour my woman close and pour my heart into her ear like wine. The imagery of that language is phenomenal. And then you get that image of like kind of the skeletal figure literally pouring the heart and the blood into her ear. It's phenomenal. I mean, the idea of the skeletal child in the womb as well. There's some really, really, really powerful stuff. And I think that the Philippa Drakeford's imagery really brings to life the powerful imagery that he's already created with the words as well.
Yeah, I think so.
The most powerful is probably that last day. In my self-indulgent trips of alcohol abuse, I feel hate, jealousy, greed, and I shove the imagined borders of my mind inside and invite them to bleed. And I think, yeah, I mean, that tells you everything about his state of mind, I think, as well. So it's No, really, really, really powerful stuff.
And I think what's interesting is there aren't very many that don't have a little introductory paragraph. And this one doesn't. I think he wants it to be odd and obscure and unexplained. Well, clearly he does, because he hasn't explained it.
Yes.
No, I like that, even though I was like, shit, you've got a fucking English degree, and are you not getting this? Does it matter that you're not getting this? And I don't think it does.
I mean, this one, I want to like study it over and over again. I mean, I want about bringing this one to my writers group and say, can we look at this? Because it's so powerful, but I don't feel like I fully understand it yet either.
Next up is It's Strange, which was written as a alternative theme tune, like just a poem over some music, for a TV show called The Marksman, which Craig Charles actually played a murderer in. Now, I've looked this up, and it was shown once. So it's quite an obscure television show, which I think we'll probably look at some point. Maybe not as a priority, but I think we will look at it at some point on Shipwrecked and Comatose, because it fascinates me. These one-off dramas that are, if you've seen them, where they're like really kind of heavily promoted, they run and then they're completely forgotten. And I would like to see Craig Charles play a murderer, because he was quite young, actually. He'd only done a few, I think it was maybe between series 2 and 3 of Red Dwarf when The Marksman aired. It's on YouTube, and so I have listened to the theme tune, and the theme tune itself is only the first 2 stanzas. And it is read by Craig Charles. So that's actually really interesting that whilst he's written a full poem, it's only the first 2 stanzas that became the theme tune of The Marksman.
I mean, yeah, it's an interesting one. Again, it goes back to his thoughts on religion and or lack thereof. And it's strange to think we think of God as someone who upstairs in the sky who doesn't care that in the basement the law is an eye for an eye. So, and then the next bit is obviously that the whole thing with the police brutality straight away. So it kind of really goes into that as well. So yeah, some interesting stuff here.
I think it nudges towards the anti-religious, but also acknowledges that he is still religious. So I think there's almost a desperation in hating your religion but appealing to God. And, you know, I'm quite fortunate I never really had that. I just kind of, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, I just kind of grew out of believing in God because it didn't make any sense to me. I never had an existential crisis. Just mid-teens, I was like, I don't think there's a God. And then I just disengaged. And I do feel real compassion for people who have this crisis, who struggle between their kind of journey from faith to faithless. And yeah, I like this bit. I think I know people who've been through this, but I never did.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this one is one that I didn't really connect with as much, but there's some interesting imagery in the language here as well. Yeah,
I think I connect it in a different way because obviously a lot of my life, a lot of my job is in non-religion. So I'll always engage with something like this, but it wasn't my journey. It's just a journey I've seen quite a lot of other people have.
Yeah.
And I think I liked it. I thought it was really good. And it's something that I would probably share with people that either have gone through that or are going through that. Next up is Inverness, which is... did you notice that this was the only one that didn't have a separate kind of intro page with its little paragraph? And I don't understand why.
It's slotted in, isn't it? And I mean, I love the image of this one. The get very classic. The glistening bars lie still in the pools. Pine comes open and welcoming summer to comb the brook. It's nice. I get the flow of water through this one, which is really, really nice. As God is my witness, I look in your eyes and I drown in the blueness. Inverness. It's a nice poem. I don't necessarily get much from it, but it's a nice poem. Yeah,
and I think I'd agree with that. This was the kind of poem I feared there'd be too much of in the book. But for something that seems quite personal, I don't understand the format change. I don't know why he hasn't got the little introductory paragraph.
Yeah, I don't know what this one's about or really what it's there. I mean, if we had more time, we could probably study it. But yeah, I think there's more powerful stuff like the next one, certainly.
You're right. The next one is called New Life, and it's about his mum dying of cancer. And it's so personal, and gets an explanation, which Inverness doesn't. And I lost my mum in 2020, and I fully understand how long it takes to mourn your mum. And this one was tough for me. I found this really tough.
Can you imagine? I mean, I haven't lost my mum, unfortunately. I know 3 people who have died of cancer in the last 6 months, which is it's more like a spree. It's horrific, and but the imagery here is wonderful and very personal, and it's those the final lines I think that really resonate as well.
Yeah, I mean, my mum died very suddenly, but I suspect that she would have done the same had she known it was coming. I think she would have been very similar, an attempt at compassion. And the one thing that did strike me about the illustrations is it highlights Craig Charles being mixed race. Throughout the book up to this point, it's all been about his black heritage, but obviously he is mixed race, and his mum was white, and that image of the hands together, that kind of highlights it. So I think, I think that was really subtle, but it also kind of, Sorry, I've got a bit funny over this one.
No, of course, I absolutely get it. It's emotional stuff, but it's very well done, and the imagery works really well against it as well. And we can move on from this one, but it's powerfully done.
Next up is Spinner of Years, and I don't think there are many people that aren't always pissed up on New Year's Eve, surely.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's interesting from the point of view of an alcoholic as well, and which is going to have another level to it. But it's there's that kind of, it starts with please raise your glasses to love, life, and laughter, and then it kind of gets sadder as well as it keeps in. And the idea is. I think the idea is, we all think, New Year, new fresh start and stuff, and that doesn't quite happen. And I think that's captured here nicely as well. It's
not a particularly optimistic poem. The line about how the future surprisingly can quickly become the present. I was like, ow.
Yes, absolutely.
I think even if it hadn't been made explicit that it was his New Year's Eve poem, it was also quite obvious that it was a New Year's Eve poem as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so the last one, let's have another one, let's have 3 cheers, let's drink a toast to the spinner of years. It's like things keep going. We get all this, a new year, new start, and actually that line about the present, the future becomes the present very quickly. Yeah, I think it's well done. It's not the most amazing poem in the world, but I like the sentiment behind it.
I think so too. Next up is Porthcurno, which was written in Cornwall, and it's about Cornwall. It's another one of these subtly illustrated ones. It's just a seagull.
Yeah.
In general, this one was one that I thought was okay, but there was one line that, fucked with my head, because I have a real problem with silence. If I'm alone, without exception, if I'm not asleep, I will have music on. I really struggle with silence, and I've never thought about it like this way until I read this poem, but silence is a sound, and that sound to me is essentially like, for some people, how it would be to scrape a blackboard. Silence isn't something that I want to experience. And that, I just was like, oh, fuck. That's 4 words that he didn't even mean, probably, to hit me like that. But that, I couldn't really look at the rest of the poem because that particular line just kind of grabbed me by the throat.
Yeah, I say the first two sections are all about the imagery, the smell of heather and the lavender carpet and bracken and the smell of the ocean, spray of the water, all beautiful, lovely imagery, and then it goes into that silence and the moonlight, and it's takes a different turn at the end.
Next up is Jump, which the illustrations are nauseatingly good. Like
they are.
The final image. Oh,
I feel vertigo just looking at it.
Do you know, it reminded me of the very famous prison image from Sin City that had a similar kind of way of just grabbing your eyes and the looking down thing, and it's so effective. And I've never wondered what he wondered, which I'm glad that I can say that, because it doesn't sound like it's much fun.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But it's very effectively done, and I mean, yeah, in high places close to the edge, why does it always cross our minds and wonder what it'd be like to jump? And I wonder if Craig has felt that dark. But I imagine, based on some of the stuff in this poem, that maybe he has, and it's quite dark. But yeah, it's interesting. It starts about claustrophobia, and it ends with out in the open and wanting to jump as well. So it's about trying to escape, I guess.
Yeah, it's just really, really good. And again, very much, if you'd have told me that this collection had comic strip illustrations, I'd have gone, oh, fuck, no. I would have been wrong. Yeah. This is very much enlightened and emphasized and warmed by having these illustrations. Which is funny, because the final one we're going to look at, Near Perfect Minutes, is the only one that has no illustrations whatsoever. It doesn't have an intro, and it doesn't have even one of the smaller, subtle illustrations. And I don't get why. The consistency changes actually bother me. I mean, I realise that makes me an anal old queen, but it did bother me, and I did notice it, and I would have liked it to have had the consistency across the board. Did that bother you?
It's almost like a closing song, isn't it? It's in those near perfect minutes, and then a line, and it keeps repeating in those near perfect minutes every single time, and everything happens perfectly. It's a kind of a slightly uplifting moment, uplifting finale to the book as well, which I really like, actually. Because obviously there's heavy stuff in this book as well, and there were some lovely lines like, "When imprisoned in your arms, I feel set free. When your kisses beat the rhythm of my pulse." It's nice moment of capturing those moments that feel like an eternity. It's lovely, it's uplifting, and capturing it's basically capturing those perfect moments in life, I think. And it is like a song almost at the end that kind of wrap it up as well. And I'm kind of glad that it ends on a bit more of a positive note, given some of the dark stuff in here. But it almost feels out on its own with everything else.
I think it does, and also because of previous poems in the book that have been either unsubtle, borderline crass, or have talked very negatively about relationships. This one, which kind of goes into how the post-coital cuddles and euphoria, and I feel it transcends sexuality. Whereas poems written about women, perhaps I won't engage with as much. Whereas this one,
that's fair.
This is a poem written about people. This isn't a poem written about specifically heterosexual relationships. Yeah. And I really get this. This one is another one of the ones that hit me. Even though it's written about a woman, it could have been written about a man. And I really liked it. It was a really nice way to end it. But they could have just had a little picture of a bed or something, just for my kind of like level of control freak. And but it was really, I think it was a really subtle choice to finish with, to give you a pleasant experience that literally everyone that's had sex, I guess, but pretty much everyone can resonate with. And I think, all in all, I've only, like I say, I only really criticised one that I thought maybe it shouldn't have been in. But even then, it kind of worked. It kind of sandwiched the very sweet No Other Blue. I feel like the flow of this book has been excellent. I feel like the choices have actually been really, really good. It's clearly a lot of thought has gone into this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's been interesting with talking through it actually and seeing it all come to, as we go through it and seeing that journey that he's on as well. Yeah, really good stuff.
And how do you feel about the book as a whole? Was it what you expected? Did you expect Craig Charles to be a great poet? What did you expect from the book? And do you feel like that you got what you expected?
Yes and no, because there was something like Fleasdom, for example, which is definitely my favourite poem because I want to look at it more. That has some amazing imagery in the language. And there are some stuff that possibly the more juvenile stuff that feels a little bit like basic, and it's up and down. I think there are moments when he's great, actually, more so than I may realise on the first time read, and there are bits when it's fine. Yeah. So I think the imagery really surprised me, and I'm the same as you. If it had all been kind of comic book tough, I would have gone really okay. But I like how it brings that to life as well. So it's not what I expected, and there are bits that were okay, but bits that I really liked as well. But really powerful stuff in there, and I feel like, he's opened up, he's expressed his own personal views and experiences, and that's quite powerful stuff.
I think you're right. I went into this expecting a lot of stuff like the first couple of poems that we had, because that had been what I'd seen him quoting on various kind of documentaries and interviews and stuff. I didn't expect anything like Flessim, and whereas maybe if I thought about it a little bit more, maybe I'd have expected some stuff about being working class, being Liverpudlian, being black, but he'd kind of shied away from those, and I can understand why. He was using the more comedic and the more family friendly and the less political stuff whenever he was in public. So I was really pleased with this. Obviously, I have very similar politics to borderline exactly the same politics. So I was always going to engage with that.
Definitely.
But I do feel like this was a pleasant surprise for me.
Oh, definitely.
And I'm delighted that it was as well. It's a shame that he maybe just moved away from poetry after this, because there's never been, from what I've been able to see looking online, there's never been talk of a second volume or him doing more poetry. And as we went into the 21st century, again, he's not really seen as a poet anymore, whereas obviously his start was on Wogan as a poet. And so I think he's just moved away from it. And had you asked me before reading this, I'd have been like, meh. But now I've read this, I'm like, that's actually quite a shame.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's have a final discussion about what our favourite and least favourites were. I think they're going to end up being quite obvious. What was your favourite?
Yeah, Flessim, I think, is just both the imagery but also the language as well. I want to look at this again and again. It's just really, really resonated with, stuck me. I don't actually fully understand it, but what I read was really powerful. And I think that was particularly powerful. Yeah, definitely my favourite.
I think the illustrations of Flessim were my favourite.
Yes, they were, absolutely.
Because I don't understand it, I've kind of decided it isn't my favourite, even though the image is just so incredible. So I think it depends on my mood, actually. So if I'm left-wing, right-on, fight the war kind of guy, I think Hypothermia. It's just so powerful.
Great one.
But if I'm romantic, I want a boyfriend kind of guy, then it's No Other Blue. So I think depending on my mood, it's one of those two. Yeah,
they're all really good. I'd say they're definitely top of the list for me.
I think we're probably going to agree on our least favourite as well. It is an obvious one. Mine was I Want to Feel Your Bum. It just felt like yuck.
Yeah, I agree, because even though In the City didn't feel out of place, it was still really well done.
Exactly.
I think I Want to Feel Your Bum just was too juvenile, and the message is not great.
And let's be blunt, if you'd cut I Want to Feel Your Bum, you could have stuck to format for all the other poems, and that would have helped with my analness.
Right.
In all seriousness, if that was my anthology and I'd proofread that, I would have wanted the format to have been perfect, because I would have seen that as part of my art.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And I'm fascinated that Craig Charles isn't as bothered about that sort of thing as me.
Yeah. It's more of a trail of thoughts, isn't it?
So, Baz, this has been an absolute pleasure, and it was obviously a big change in format. We've not looked at poetry before, and we're probably unlikely to look at poetry again. But I really enjoyed this, and I hope that our listeners have too. And if they have, please tell them where else they can find you, podcasting-wise, and anywhere else on the internet.
Yeah, so basically, Baz Greenland at Twitter is where you can find me, all my books. I've got a book on Babylon 5, the 30-year history of the show, coming out hopefully into this year. Another Dot 2 related books for Candy Jar Books and short stories. And then podcasting, it's all on We Made This now. So I'm on TARDIS Crew Dot 2 podcast. I co-host my son Ben, which you've been on. I think I look at Dimensions in Time, which is really fun. It's going to come out in July. And the other main one is A Dream Given Form, which is a Babylon 5 podcast too.
If you're looking for me, it's at Mark Adams HC on Twitter and Instagram. And you know my only other podcast is Chucky Vision, at Chucky Vision on Twitter. So thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Shipwrecked and Comatose. Next up is our coverage of Back to Earth. And until then...
Brilliant.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network.
Do you know your Daleks from your Drashings?
Or your Zygons from your Zagreus?
Do you know what the TARDIS stands for?
And do you know which Doctor Who stories featured Kevin Grimlock, the cyborg T-Rex that became the Doctor's companion?
Then this is a Doctor Who podcast for you. I'm Baz Greenland, and each fortnight I chat to my son Ben.
Hello.
And the occasional guest as we cover 60 years of Doctor Who on TV, Big Finish, and more.
And I did really enjoy that one. Except that wasn't really actual pirates, it was Badger pirates in space, but it was still piratey.
Badger pirates in space?
Yes. But I am willing to make an exception for pirates this episode.
Donald Sumpter is amazing. I love the fact that he just pops up. He just pops up. Probably Rassilon. Probably.
Well, they do confirm later on he is.
I think they do.
Yeah,
don't
he
they?
says I'm Rassilon the Redeemer.
Of course he does. Bloody hell.
And he has the gauntlet as well, which gives the hint of that.
Yeah.
I'm nodding profusely.
Yeah. We're proper classic Doctor Who as well. A lot of it as well.
Yes.
In a week has done more for the show than the last 5 years.
I do like how Ross D. Davies is kind of the PR spokesman for the Centenary special. That's quite fun.
Yeah. And he's also saying, oh, well, Jodie and Chibnall still have an episode left. I'm not going to tread on their feet, but he is 14, just so you know, for the filming purposes. And a week later, oh, yeah, by the way, these guys are back. Just thought you'd want to know. Find us on the We Made This network.
And all good podcast providers.
What about the bad ones?
Yes, them too.
Ah, good.
Because somewhere there's danger.
Somewhere there's injustice.
Somewhere else, the tea's getting cold.
You know, we probably should throw that tea away now. It has been sat there since 1989.